Okay, I don't know how that worked, but if anybody's on video, give me a thumbs up if you could hear it or see it. Um, Hopefully that worked well. Okay, good. Again, thank you so much for being here and being patient with us as we do this virtual presentation. You know, it's been my pleasure to share this story and share my experience writing this book at events throughout Florida and Georgia, the Southeast. And I was really looking forward to this program in particular at Winter Park and at Casa Feliz because of the significance that it holds in Gamble's life. Of course, circumstances have us gathering virtually. And this is actually, as it's been said, the first virtual presentation I've done, and really the first presentation I've done at all in the book since March when the pandemic hit. But I consider this this particular event, to be significant on many levels. First of all, Gamble would have celebrated his 84th birthday on January 31st this week. And it's a reminder of a life taken too soon. And most especially, of course, this event is part of the Winter Park Library and Casa Feliz Parlor to Parlor program. Is so significant because of the significance in Gamble's life and the influence of the Rogers family on the entire Winter Park community. Before I ever wrote the first word in this book, I was treated to an extensive walking tour of Winter Park and a detailed tour of every room in Casa Feliz by the wonderful Jack Rogers, Gamble's brother. And during our walk through Winter Park, Jack was quick to point out the various landmarks and sites that were the subject of so many of Gamble's remarkable repertoire. And I'll always be grateful to Jack for his courtesies, and just want to say thank you again for him making this project possible, along with Lynn and so many other members of Gamble's family and friends that were so cooperative in the putting together of this book. You know, I should start by saying that I never knew Gamble Rogers. I never met him, and in fact, I never saw him perform. So the question is always asked, well, what got you interested in writing this book, telling this story? And it really started with a neighbor and an old photograph. We have a place at Crescent Beach, and our neighbors were the late Honorable Bruce McEwen and his wife, ML. I think ML might even be on the program tonight. I think I see her initials there, so welcome, ML. And as ML will tell you, that Bruce McEwen used to always carry around a little black and white photograph in his pocket. And he was fond of pulling it out and showing it to people and asking them to guess who was in the photograph. Well, the photograph was of two babies in diapers. And of course, the two babies were Bruce McEwen and James Gamble Rogers IV, as Bruce used to call him, and his friends used to call him Jimmy, but we've all come to know him as Gamble Rogers, the performer. They were about 6 months old at the time the photograph was taken. And so the connection is that Bruce McEwen's father was a physician who delivered Gamble, and Gamble's father, the renowned architect, of course, Gamble Rogers II, built the McEwen home. And so the McEwens, Bruce and ML and Gamble, were lifelong friends. Bruce was a lifelong friend, and when ML came into the picture, Gamble was very close to them until the end of his life. Once he showed me this picture and started telling me stories about Gamble, I was really intrigued, and like so many others outside of the Winter Park area, I knew Gamble's name, but I knew very little about him. I'd never met him, I'd never seen him perform, but I was curious, so I started to search the library and internet, trying to find out what I could learn about this icon. And come to find out that there was very little out in the public about Gamble. And I thought, what a shame. This person was in the Florida Songwriters Hall of Fame. There was a park named after him, a school named after him, and yet so few people seem to know any details about this remarkable figure. There was certainly a lot of literature, a lot of information about his father, the remarkable architect, Gamble Rogers II. In fact, my publisher, University Press of Florida, actually has a book about James Gamble Rogers II, that details much of his architectural work. So my curiosity got the best of me, and I set out on my own journey to discover Gamble Rogers. I decided that it's never too late. And I knew I'd be at a certain disadvantage because I never had met him, but it did give me the opportunity to discover Gamble from a very fresh perspective. So I began meeting with the people closest to Gamble, like fellow folk singer Bob Patterson, of course, Gamble's brother Jack, Lynn, who was so gracious of her time and her insights when we met up in Georgia, and other members of the family, and so many other friends and associates of Gamble. And each interview, it was like a maze. It would lead to another door to open, another subject to uncover. And I was soon really driven to sort of write this story. The more I learned about him, the more compelled I was, and I felt that his story needed to be out there. Not insignificantly, while I was researching the book, I learned that there was actually a movement underway to rename the Gamble Rogers Memorial Park in Flagler County. They were going to take his name off the park. And the rationale is that the people in Flagler County said no one knows who he is, and they thought it would be better for business if they just restored the original name of the park, which was the Flagler County Recreational Park. Not to mention the fact that the Gamble Rogers Park was had the highest level of occupancy of any state park in Florida. But nevertheless, there was a movement among some people in Flagler County to take his name off the park. Well, I was aghast, as were so many others. And while Gamble's name had not been out in the public as much, I was just learning about him, so it was all fresh to me. And we met with the Florida delegation, legislative delegation, who assured us that it was an act of the legislature. They would never take his name off the park. But my passion for the book really became an obsession. I decided that it can never happen like this, that people don't have access or don't know who he is. We have to refresh people's memories. And so much work had been done by so many to keep his legacy alive. And I just wanted to add another piece to that so that there would be a book that people could put their hands on to learn a little bit about Gamble Rogers. So I set about meeting as many people as I could, and I met a cast of unforgettable characters, eager to tell the story, each turn leading to another. There were singers, there were songwriters, artists, carpenters, fishermen, lawyers, luthiers, and just plain folks. And their stories were hilarious and emotional. And what I came to know in this research was that Gamble was so much more than just the charismatic performer that you saw on stage. He was the real definition of a humanitarian. And I learned so much about human dignity and courtesy and the act of being a Southern gentleman and kindness, that those are lessons that will stay with me for all of my life. And so I really felt that this was important for people to know that there was just so much more to this man. I'm going to take you through a very, very brief overview of his life. For those that aren't familiar, this is a very abridged version, and I'll go through it pretty quickly. But he was raised in Winter Park, obviously in a family of prestigious architects, several generations of very, very well-known architects. And he was raised in Winter Park, and they would spend their summers at the family farm in the Nacoochee Valley in Georgia. And that's where Gamble was exposed to rural agrarian life, which had a big influence on him. He had a lot of respect for that lifestyle. And a lot of the influence in the Winter Park and a lot of the influences that he experienced during his summers in the Nacoochee Valley became the foundation for much of his repertoire, his songs, the stories that he would tell. He attended Winter Park High School, and while he was at Winter Park High School, he was participating in a long jump exercise and fell on his tailbone and was suffering some pain for a while, which turned out to have nothing to do with the fall from the jump, but it was discovered that he had a form of juvenile arthritis. And it was a very serious condition that potentially would have the risk of having his spine fused. So in his later years in high school, rather than participate in athletics and after-school activities, Gamble would go home and lay flat on his back under a heated lamp and try to get some treatment for his back. But in the meantime, he would read everything he could get his hands on, the classics, novels. He even read through the family Webster Dictionary, which I've actually seen, and it's this big, thick volume. And he read through the dictionary. He became so proficient in the English language, again, reading everything he could get his hands on. And at the same time, he began practicing the guitar every day. He had fallen in love with the choke style guitar picking style of Merle Travis and Chet Atkins. And he did everything he could. He was self-taught, and he did everything he could to mimic that style, learn that style, expand on that style while he was laying on his back every afternoon at Winter Park. And he had a passion for music, a passion for storytelling. Um, he likes to describe those years, in later life, he described those high school years as tales of a misspent youth. But we know better. He used that time very wisely. So after his years at Winter Park High School, he went to college at University of Virginia. He joined his brother Jack, who was a student there, and he took a stab at several majors: English, philosophy, and of course architecture. It was really expected that Gamble would go into the family business and become an architect. And while he's at University of Virginia, who was there? But William Faulkner, uh, the Nobel laureate, was doing a scholar in residence at University of Virginia while Gamble was there. And there's several stories as to how Gamble actually met William Faulkner. Lynn knows a few. Gamble told a few. None of the stories are the same. There are a few of them mentioned in the book. I'll leave it to you to figure out which ones are true. But it's certain that Gamble met and had a meeting with Faulkner. And at that meeting, Faulkner listened to Gamble talk about how he was studying to be an architect, but his passion was music and telling stories. And Faulkner sort of admonished him and said, follow your dreams, follow your passion. And so shortly before his final exams in his senior year, Gamble dropped out of the University of Virginia, or as his family likes to say, he was excused from the University of Virginia. And he went on to take music lessons, and he went on to try to pursue his passion, which was writing and music. So he returned to Winter Park without a degree, played in local clubs around town, and really he actually started getting a following of people in the Winter Park area who were just enthralled with his music, his guitar ability, and he started getting a following. He took a brief stint in Tallahassee with some friends, Paul Champion and Chuck Glore, and they started a nightclub in Tallahassee called The Baffled Knight. And they played folk songs, tried to make a go of it. They were there for a couple of years, but it really wasn't much of a success. So he returned to Winter Park, moved right next door to the family architect business, and tried to give another stab at architecture while moonlighting on the side with folk singing, musical performances. He would spend long weekends going to folk festivals. He spent some time in Greenwich Village, where the folk scene was burgeoning. He spent time going to California, places all around the country. Any place he could find music, Gamble would pursue. In the meantime, he was still working at the family firm, dabbling in architecture, even without a degree. Sometime in the mid-60s, Gamble decided that the moonlighting was becoming difficult. And so he was made aware of a job in Boston with a progressive architecture firm. And he made the decision to move to Boston, or interview for this job, and hopefully move to Boston where he could practice architecture. And also he was familiar with the music scene there. He could also freelance musically in Boston, which was a community rich in music. But a funny thing happened on his way to Boston. He stopped off in New York, and a friend of his had made him aware that a group called the Serendipity Singers were having an audition in Greenwich Village. And the Serendipity Singers, some of you may recall them, they were very similar in style to the New Christie Minstrels. They were a folk ensemble group, and they had an opening for a guitar player. So unannounced, Gamble shows up at this club in Greenwich Village with his guitar, and he wowed them so much so that they hired him on the spot. So he picks up the phone, he calls his family and says, I'm out of the architecture business. I've just landed a gig with the Serendipity Singers, and I'm going to pursue my career in music. So he went really from an unknown musician other than in local circles to suddenly joining this band that was on the national stage and about to appear on the Ed Sullivan Show. So they actually made 2 appearances on the Ed Sullivan Show. Gamble was in one of them. And he was on the Tonight Show and really played college campuses all around the country. And it was really an amazing sort of jettison for Gamble in his career to be with this group of singers. But it wasn't long before Gamble realized that he had so much talent and so much to offer, and he sort of considered himself to be kind of a hired gun with the Serendipity Singers. They were a large group. They were constantly changing members of the band, and he was sort of anonymous in that group. So he really made a decision to set out on his own. So he comes back to Florida to try to reestablish himself as a folk singer, and he settles in Coral Gables, in Coconut Grove, actually, and begins to work at a place called The Flick. And The Flick was one of these iconic cafes where Joni Mitchell and David Crosby and all these musicians, folk musicians, were honing their craft. And Gamble, too, began honing his craft at this iconic cafe called The Flick. And it's there that he began to develop his style, which was incredible finger picking, guitar playing, unbelievable stage presence. And one thing that Gamble had learned in his days with the Serendipity Singers is that storytelling became very much a necessary part of the folk act. If you wanted to keep your audience engaged, you had to tell stories. And boy, Gamble could tell some stories. He began creating some fictional characters in his own mind out of his experiences in the Coochie Valley and out of his experiences in growing up at Winter Park and his general life experiences. And he created characters and began telling stories. Interestingly, initially, they were all based in Georgia, but Gamble soon came to realize that Florida was his home, and he changed the setting to Florida a little bit later. But he's at the Flick Cafe, he's honing his skills, he's becoming a really proficient performer, and he continues to move around. He ends up in St. Augustine, Florida, partially because St. Augustine represented old Florida, and Gamble was very much connected to old Florida. He grew up in Winter Park before Cape Kennedy, Cape Canaveral, before Disney World, and he was very much attached to the land and very much attached to old Florida. And I think he found some of that in St. Augustine. And at St. Augustine, he lands at a place called the Trade Winds Tropical Saloon, which really became his boot camp. That's where Gamble really honed his skills and really learned how to interact with an audience and really saw the impact he was having on an audience. He traveled around the country. He really wasn't making much money. He always preferred to travel in his altered car that was adjusted. The seats were adjusted to accommodate his back. He put thousands of miles on his Mustang, hundreds of thousands of miles on his Mustang, always driving around the country looking for another club to play, but always returning to Florida, which he considered his home. And over time, he became more and more known for his craft and his ability to turn an audience. And he really started branching out more. A big turning point for Gamble was when he met Charles Stedham, who was owning a entertainment agency in Gainesville, Florida. And without a signed contract, they shook hands and made a deal. And Charles took over all the bookings and all the financial aspects of Gamble's career so that he could go out and really perform, which is what he enjoyed the best. He really did enjoy the financial picture of things. And Charles had established a real niche in the listening room venues. And these were clubs where you had to pay attention to the performer. They didn't encourage loud drinking and loud partying. You really had to pay attention. And there were these listening rooms were popping up all over the country in the mid 70s, late 70s. And Gamble played them all in Florida, in New York, New Jersey, Washington, Detroit, Canada, all over the country. And he became a must-have act. His style of folksy, homespun tales weaved in with incredible guitar picking, it just became something that was in great demand. And Gamble would sometimes do 2 or 3 shows a night, these fast-paced, rapid shows where he just wouldn't even give the audience a chance to process. He would move so fast. And they were hysterical and mesmerized at the same time. Where he did find an audience beyond the listening rooms was with public television and public radio. Because they didn't have commercials and had I guess, more adaptable format, they were able to accommodate Gamble in his front porch monologues that usually took 5 or 10 minutes sometimes to tell a story. He wasn't one with just the one-liners. He had to build a story. And his craft at doing that was just so incredible and so amazing. And National Public Radio had him often as a guest on All Things Considered. He was on many public television stations, and he found a real audience there. He also found an audience in folk festivals. That was probably one of the loves of his life, was to perform at folk festivals. And at the Florida Folk Festival in particular, he became really the titular head of the folk festival. He was the go-to person. He brought new acts in. He was the main event. People came from miles to hear Gamble spin his tails, play his guitar. He introduced new acts. He always appealed to the common man, and the folk festivals were very much a part of his life. He also, unbeknownst to so many people, took on personal causes, things that he cared about. He cared about the environment. He cared about people who were in need. He did so many things that were unnoticed or anonymously, and it was just sort of the type of person that he was. So he never really sought fame and fortune. He really felt like he could have had major contract albums if he wanted. I remember Lynn telling me that Gamble told her once that, you know, he could have had record contracts, but it wasn't something that he was comfortable with. Once you start impressing yourself with yourself, you know, you've lost all focus. Gamble was a down-to-earth person. What you saw was what you got. He was very comfortable in what he was doing, very comfortable with the people he was playing for, and really never sought fame and fortune. But he was still making a pretty good career and doing pretty well. And of course, we all know what happened at the end. Actually, a year before, Gamble had experienced the loss of 3 people who were very close to him. Paul Champion, who was an extraordinary banjo player and probably Gamble's first guitar music partner, had passed away. Will McLean, who was the renowned folk singer and the father of folk music in the state of Florida, who had an enormous influence on Gamble, had also passed away. And then, of course, his father had passed. And Gamble's relationship with his family was very, very unique. Of course, they questioned why he would give up an architecture career to pursue music. It was risky, of course, but they came to respect what he did and that he was following his dreams. And Gamble had profound respect for his mother and father, and he gave a eulogy to his father at his father's funeral called "My Father Was a Voyager." And it was really, not only was it just beautiful and poignant, it was also sort of clairvoyant. It talks about what would you do if you were caught in the surf, and how would you escape? What would you do? And it's a very, very poignant eulogy that turned out to be prophetic a year later when Gamble is camping in 1991 at Flagler Beach Recreational Park, and a nor'easter had come up, and a Canadian tourist had gotten caught in the surf. The tourist's young daughter came running to the campground that Gamble was at and screamed that her father needed help. Gamble, being who Gamble was, didn't hesitate. He blew up a life raft, stripped down to his underwear. And despite the fact that he suffered from this ongoing back problem, he really couldn't swim. He didn't think twice about it. He got on the raft and went out to try to save the stranger, the Canadian person who was caught out in the surf. And as we all know, in an instant, both the person who had been caught in the surf and Gamble passed away, caught up in the nor'easter. So sad, so heroic, so tragic. Never a chance to say goodbye, never a chance for a final performance. But so many people felt that Gamble's life would probably end in some tragic, heroic way. That was just the kind of person that he was. And of course, after his tragic and heroic end, so many efforts were made to keep his legacy alive. The Gamble Rogers Memorial Foundation was started. The Gamble Rogers Music Festival was started. A middle school in St. Augustine was named for Gamble. And of course, the park where he drowned was named by the state legislature as the Gamble Rogers Memorial Park. But unfortunately, over time, those memories start to fade. And even the high school doesn't have much connection with Gamble Rogers. The Gamble Rogers Middle School actually has very little connection with Gamble, which is very sad. The park had no literature about Gamble. And that's sad. And of course, we know the story about the state park in the effort to try to take his name off the park because people didn't know who he was. So many efforts are continuing. The book is one. Charles Stedham has done a marvelous documentary now that is going to be out for release soon. And so these are part of this book was to, in some small way, contribute to the legacy. So that's the quick sort of overview. And I just want to take a moment to give you a little bit of flavor of how that legacy translates to the book. And I'm going to, with your indulgence, just read a brief little excerpt from the introduction. I'm going to skip around a little bit, but it's just a brief little excerpt, and I hope you'll bear with me here. And I'm going to try to share the screen again and see if I can do this. Let's see here. Okay. It was in the early evening hours of October 10th, 1991, when the phone rang inside the residential trailer nestled in the woods off Rattlesnake Lane in Lake Wales, Florida. "We've lost Gamble," uttered the subdued voice of the caller. "Lost him? Well, you better go find him." The news was so stunning, it never even registered. Gamble Rogers, Florida's beloved troubadour, was lost forever. How could it be that this legendary figure, bigger than life, could be gone in an instant? All of the mystique, the charisma, the charm, the downright goodness washed away without even the slightest warning. To those who knew him, Gamble's sudden tragic death was the ultimate paradox. It came as no surprise that he took it upon himself to strip to his shirt and underwear, blow up an air mattress, and try to rescue a perfect stranger from the fierce nor'easter wreaking havoc on Florida's coast. However, it was obvious that the creator of a treasured repository of Florida folklore had no chance. At age 54, his mobility was limited by an arthritic back condition discovered in adolescence that plagued him most of his life. "He couldn't swim in a swimming pool, much less the ocean," remarked a close friend. While there was never an autopsy, the cause of death seemed far less important than the good causes he left behind, the title track from a CD released after his death. The fact that Florida even has a folk tradition was due in large measure to Gamble Rogers and the community of mythical misfits and malcontents he imagined and brought to life night after night in remote pubs and taverns across the state. His followers would return to hear the very same stories over and over, looking for a new nuance or simply because they just needed another good laugh. More than a polished performer and storyteller, Gamble connected with people regardless of their background or status. Lost at the Florida sea surf would be so many lasting images: the distinctive chin, the corkscrew gait, the onstage facial contortions, and the sight of his faded lime green 1965 fastback Mustang parked outside a local saloon, signaling that Gamble was in town. "Everyone wanted to play guitar like Gamble," said a fellow folk musician, "but more than that, everyone wanted to be like Gamble." Believing it's never too late, I began my search to find Gamble Rogers. In the end, my journey to find Gamble was a search for the truth. But as with so many folk legends, the real truth is often obscured. It should come as no surprise that there are conflicting versions of the story. So who was the real Gamble Rogers? Was it the guitar picker extraordinaire who, along with Will McLean, Jim Ballou, Paul Champion, ushered in a renaissance of Florida folk music in the mid-1970s and through the early 1980s? Was it Gamble Rogers, the linguistic humorist, who preached the erudite philosophies of Still Bill, Agamemnon Jones, War Bunny, Downwind Dave, and other rural alchemists who inhabited the primitive backwoods squalor of Ocklawaha County and held court at the Terminal Tavern? Was it Gamble Rogers, the family man, who balanced the demands of a hectic professional life with that of being a devoted father and friend to those who loved and knew him best? Was it Gamble Rogers, the environmentalist, who sought peace and inspiration, traversing Florida's natural waters and parks with his trusty kayak and battered bicycle? Or was it Gamble Rogers, the giving soul, who thought not for a minute before making the ultimate sacrifice of plunging into the raging sea to save a perfect stranger? Maybe Gamble himself answered it best. When he was interviewed for the radio show, The Songs of Florida, he was asked, Gamble, what do you consider yourself to be? A guitar player, a humorist, a storyteller, or a folk singer? Gamble replied, well, I ain't nothing more than a whiskey salesman. I play in those dives, and the more whiskey they drink, the more money I make. So I wanted to give you a little sense of Gamble as portrayed in the book. And I think it's time for us now to hear a little bit of Gamble, the whiskey salesman. I'm going to play for you a snippet of a live performance that Gamble did in Charleston, South Carolina. And Gamble would always open his show with Orange Blossom Special. And he could take that guitar and make it sound like a train. And as you'll see from this act, Gamble takes notes. This is a straight through recording that I'm going to play for you. He doesn't take a break. He keeps going. Keep in mind, it's just one person on stage entertaining an audience, and you'll get a real sense of Gamble, the performer, and his genius and his ability to captivate an audience. So I hope you enjoy this. This is a live performance of Gamble. And again, please bear with us on the technology. We're going to try to make this work. So just bear with us. Okay, well, I hope that gave you a little test of example of the whiskey salesman and his unbelievable performing style. Never takes a break. Gamble would do 3 or 4 shows a night sometimes. Never stopped working, put every effort in, no matter what the size of the audience was. But you could see the genius of his presentation. Probably the best testament to Gamble is that there's no one like him, no one who's ever tried to imitate him. Certainly people were influenced by him, but no one could do what Gamble did. I know we have some questions. I just want to wrap up with a couple of thoughts. I can't stress enough that the Gamble Rogers story is a story about the human soul. Gamble was so much more than this charismatic performer. He touched so many people's lives. One of the most amazing experiences I had after writing the book was in these speaking engagements that I would have across Florida, Georgia, the Southeast. It never failed that someone would come up to me and tell me some touching story about how Gamble had changed their lives or had moved them in some way. It may have been a story that only they knew about, but Gamble made a point of connecting with people. And there's so many unsung stories that we will never know of how he touched people's lives. He was really the example of someone who exuded the values of decency and common good. And we're starved for those kind of values these days. They're hard to come by, and Gamble was the epitome of it. And so I can't stress enough how much his legacy is important, that we keep it alive. There are many ways to do that: supporting the Gamble Rogers Music Festival, supporting the efforts of the Gamble Rogers Memorial Foundation, visiting the park, spreading the word. He was really a Florida treasure, and there's never been anybody like him, and I don't know that there ever will be. But he's uniquely Florida. He was really our troubadour, and something that we really should be very, very proud of. So I wanted to save a couple of minutes for some questions. I think Rachel or someone's going to moderate those, because I can't really see the questions, but there's Rachel. Hi, Rachel.
Hey. So, John, or actually Doug, asked quite early in the program, and if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. At the very end, we'll have kind of like an open sort of mic point. But Doug Bartow it's not a question, but a comment. My favorite Gamble Rogers quote / lyric is, I met a man from Palatka. No, Palatka. Okay. Palatka. You know, that's the sound that a cow patty makes when it hits a flat rock, which is, yeah, I can see that. Mr. John Wyrick, what is the name of the valley in Georgia where he spent his childhood?
It was called the Nakuchi Valley. It's really sort of the beginning of where the Appalachian Trail starts. And they had a family farm there that was actually purchased right around the beginning of World War II. The elders in the family felt that the family would need to do some self-sustaining during the war years. And so they grew their crops, they did their farming. The men would return to Winter Park and tend to business, and the kids and the cousins and the women would all stay at the family farm. And there are some hilarious stories. I'm sure Lynn could add a few. Some are not allowed to repeat, but it certainly was a lifestyle that Gamble came to love. But it's referred to as the Nakuchi Valley, sort of near Clayton County, that sort of area of Georgia, and beautiful, beautiful area. Lynn, feel free to chime in and talk about the farm or anything else you'd like to. For those of you that don't know, Lynn is, we're so honored to have her here as Gamble's daughter, and so appreciative of Lynn and her family and everything that she has done over the years. And but Lynn, feel free to join in and chime in.
Well, thank you, Bruce. And I'm just going to say right back at you, we love you and Edith, and we're so grateful for how you have so beautifully preserved Dad's legacy. And I've read through your wonderful book several times. The first time I read through it, I had to take stops and get a new box of Kleenex. But I laughed and I cried, and so grateful for your dedication to this project. It's just blessed us all so much. So thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. And you know, Lynn, for those of you that maybe didn't know Gamble, I can tell you that Lynn emanates Gamble. She possesses his soul and his beauty, and we're very fortunate to, I'm very fortunate, Edith and I are very fortunate to have gotten to know Lynn and her family, her beautiful family, as well as all members of Gamble's family and his many friends. That was really one of the true blessings of writing this book, was the opportunity to get to know so many people who played such a role in Gamble's life. And that's a blessing that will stay with me forever. Other questions?
Words. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
would like to share a story. Can I share a very quick story that I think?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, Bruce, I think I shared this with you and Edith when you came to Pine Mountain, when you started the book. But one of my favorite stories of Daddy is was when he passed away. People literally heard the news on NPR and across the country and in folk music circles, and people as far as Canada, Vancouver, Canada, literally were driving home, heard it, came home, packed their cars, and started driving across the country, not knowing when or where the memorials would be, but knowing by the time they got to St. Augustine, Florida, there would be something organized. And that is what happened. And the outpouring of people who literally drove across the country was overwhelming, to the point we had to have 3 memorials. So I found myself in the receiving line at the end of the one at Lighthouse Park, and a man came up. I was holding my firstborn, Megan, in my arms, and this man came up to me and said, "Your father was my best friend." Well, I had heard that quite a bit throughout the day, and of course, beautiful words to hear. He was that kind of person that he could make so many people feel that way. But this man proceeded to tell me, and I'm looking at the time, so I want to be sensitive. But let me just share that this man said he had lived in the Tri-Cities area in North Carolina. He was homeless. And he said he had a friend who just didn't give up on him and would come check on him every week and get him food, get him medical care. But one week he came to him where he was living in his homeless place and said, "Come on with me. I'm going to take you to a concert tonight. I want you to hear a friend of mine perform." And he brought this man. He said, "He brought me to hear your dad, and your dad before the show came over and spoke to me." And he said, "I was so obviously homeless. There was no getting around it." But he said he saw beyond that. He treated me with such dignity and respect. He asked me what I was interested in. I told him I had done computers, asked me all about my life. And at the end of that, he said, "Well, I have to go perform now, but can we meet after the concert? So after the concert, this gentleman said, Dad came over and said, I made a few phone calls and I hope you don't mind, but I have a friend who works at IBM in the Tri-Cities area, and he would like to speak with you about a job. And he said, your dad paid for a hotel for me for 3 days. He fed me and he got me clothing. It's the job I have today. I met my wife there. I've worked for 20 years there. Your dad was my best friend. So that's one of my all-time favorite stories. And I've only shared that with a few people, but that really embodied who he was.
And that's just one of so many stories about Gamble that will never go public, that people have shared and have experienced. I do have to tell one quick funny story about Lynn, and I hope I'm not going to surprise her here, but
Okay.
and this is sort of what happens when you're writing a book. I had been looking forward to this interview with Lynn for many, many months, and we had made a bunch of arrangements to try to get it to happen. And I knew the book really couldn't happen without meeting Lynn and sitting with her in a comfortable setting in her home and doing an interview. And I was so psyched up for the interview, and I was so worked up and put all this preparation into it. And I have to admit, I was a little nervous because the whole book really depended on it. And so she graciously invites us into her home on Pine Mountain. And, I'm sitting on the couch and I'm getting ready to ask my first question. I'm just filled with nerves. And Lynn pulls out a guitar case and she opens the guitar case. And lo and behold, it's Gamble's guitar. And she hands it to me and says, play something. Well, I got to tell you, the book almost never happened because my fingers were frozen. Somehow I did something, I don't even remember, but what an icebreaker and what a memorable moment that was. Lynn, I think you recall that, but it really put me on the spot, but it broke the ice. And from there on, we had just a delightful experience and conversation.
We did. Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Rick, our very own Rick Kilby, says, I think I remember Gamble playing at my middle school with cousin Thelma in the mid-70s in Gainesville. Karen and Frank Gray ask, how many records did he record? And they also remark, one of our favorite stories is the Honey Dipper. So,
Honey Dip is quite a story. Nobody can tell it like Gamble, but the short, it's a story about portalets, so that could give you enough to tease you to go find that story. But Gamble actually recorded a couple of albums that were sort of out of circulation, and then Charles Stedham, who is the sort of the keeper of the Gamble Rogers Memorial Foundation, put great effort into getting all of Gamble's tapes and recordings and has put them on CDs that are available through the Gamble Rogers Memorial Foundation. And you can purchase his CDs as well as a DVD performance of his at the Gamble Rogers Memorial Foundation. And I believe there were maybe 6 or 7 CDs that represent Gamble's work, some of which were actually converted from a couple of the albums that he had done to just various recordings that he had done live. This little piece that I played for you at the end was actually just a live recording of his in Charleston. So Charles has done a wonderful job of working with the Gamble Rogers Memorial Foundation. He's the keeper of the archives, and you can purchase CDs directly from the Gamble Rogers Memorial Foundation.
Susan K. Butterfield says, hi, Lynn. Andrew Krasicki, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Jimmy Buffett dedicated one of his albums to Gamble after Gamble passed away. That's actually really cool because Jimmy Buffett is one of my favorite musicians. That's kind of awesome. How did they know each other?
back in the day, Gamble was the teacher and Jimmy Buffett was the student. He always looked to Gamble as his mentor. Gamble would tour and take people with him. He would take people with him wherever he went and put them up on stage. As a matter of fact, Jimmy Buffett opened for Gamble many, many times before he became the megastar that he was. They were very close, and Jimmy Buffett in his books and literature often gives credit to Gamble for making him the kind of performer that he ultimately became. But Gamble taught him the ropes. Gamble was the headliner long before Jimmy Buffett, and he'd take him to the back roads of Florida and Georgia and take him with him, and Jimmy would open for him. When Jimmy Buffett became world famous and opened up his Margaritaville Cafe, the first one in Key West, he asked Gamble to be the first opening act, the first one to perform there. So the roles changed, but the respect that Jimmy Buffett had for Gamble was never ending. And he did dedicate his Fruitcakes CD to Gamble's memory. Shortly after Gamble passed away, Jimmy Buffett did the honorable thing, dedicated this CD in his memory. And Jimmy Buffett was also very responsible. He was an advocate for Gamble's entrance into the Florida Songwriters Hall of Fame. And so I guess the Florida Artist Hall of Fame, excuse me, the Florida Artist Hall of Fame, of which Jimmy Buffett is a member. And the Florida Artist Hall of Fame includes Tennessee Williams, Marjorie Kennan Rawlings, Jimmy Buffett, and of course Gamble. And Gamble was actually nominated, and letters of presentation and letters of support were submitted by Jimmy Buffett.
That is actually exceptionally cool. Miss Lacey, thank you so much for your daddy for creating one of my favorite musicians. Oh my goodness, I had no idea. That was actually awesome.
Well, Rachel, I just want to tell you the joke was in the family that Jimmy used to open for Daddy, but then he recorded Margaritaville, and then Daddy opened for him. He always put a little humor in everything. So
I'm sure he got a kick out of that. Thank you so much. Let's see. Rick Kilby asks, is there any kind of permanent memorial to Gamble in St. Augustine? Do we know?
Unless you consider the Tradewinds Tropical Lounge a memorial, if you've never been there, when COVID is over, I can tell you that nothing's going to knock COVID out of that bar. So as many of you know, Gamble created a mythical county in Florida called Ocklawaha County that some people actually think is a county, a real place, but it was Gamble's imagination, and he populated that county with all types of sordid characters and sordid places, skull orchards, as he would call them. And the Terminal Tavern, which was his, I guess, central point in Ocklawaha County, the gathering place, was in part based on the Tradewinds Tropical Lounge. If you go in there, you will actually see a letter from Jimmy Buffett about Gamble in the Tradewinds Lounge. You will still sense the odor of the place, and it is probably the closest thing to a historical monument in St. Augustine. But Gamble is so well known and respected in St. Augustine. And of course, there is the Gamble Rogers Middle School, which is located in St. Augustine.
That is exceptionally cool. And when I take my parents back to St. Augustine, I am totally taking them there. My dad is a huge music fan, so this is gonna be wild for him.
There's the Tradewinds Tropical Lounge in the book, and you try to get a sense of what this place was like, but it really is where Gamble honed his skills, and it really it was his boot camp. So people would wait to see his Mustang or his bicycle parked out front, and they would know he was there, and the crowds would come.
And you know he's a good man because he's a Mustang man. Yes. Beth says, I often heard Gamble play at Bilbo and Gundolph's in Gainesville back in the 1970s. Loved hearing him play. Oh, please tell me that place is still around. I am a massive Lord of the Rings fan. Doug Bartow says, I booked Gamble at USF for the coffee house event on Friday through Sunday. He appeared several times and always sold out. Once he insisted on having an opening act, and it was Jimmy Buffett, another young performer on the University Coffee House circuit in Florida. Rick Kilby asked, can you tell us more about the documentary?
Yes, the documentary was the idea of Charles Steadham and members of Gamble's family. It is, unfortunately, the documentary sort of came out right about the time of COVID, and so they've had some difficulty in terms of being able to screen it. I was fortunate enough to go to the opening screening in St. Augustine. It's a magnificent documentary. I do not think it's available yet for public sale. Lynn, you may know more about that, but I don't think it's quite available yet. I know that there's some attempts to, it has aired on the PBS station in Jacksonville, but I don't know where else it's aired. Again, for more information about that, you could contact the Gamble Rogers Memorial Foundation. I know they have some plans to release it down the road, and it is really, it has, what a book can't do, which is it has footage and just really some intimate portraits of Gamble, and very, very well done. And again, Charles Steadham was very cooperative with the book, and we've worked very closely together. And we hope to do some joint projects with the book and the documentary together, all in the effort to keep Gamble's legacy alive, so that nobody ever thinks about taking his name off the park, or people walking around saying they don't know who he was.
Let's see. We have Karen and Frank Gray again ask, Lynn, did you grow up in St. Augustine, or where, if not, where did you grow up? And how many siblings did you wind up having?
Yes, I'm sitting here kind of typing an answer to that. So I actually grew up in Winter Park, was born in Winter Park Hospital, just like Dad was. Actually, my son was born in the Winter Park Hospital as well, so I guess you could say 3 generations. I have an older brother and sister, Chuck and Lolly, and then Nancy, Dad's second wife, had Stacy and Stephanie. So there were 5 of us children that he had his hands full keeping us on between the white lines, as he used to say. But he was a wonderful father to us all. And half the time I had no idea, until after you see all the lovely things that are said about a parent. We just knew him as our dad, and that he loved us and always would drop anything just to spend time with us. He was wonderful.
I was always touched by Lynn recalling that she always knew her father's schedule, where he was, and
Yes.
she had his road schedule. And if ever she needed anything or required anything, he would stop what he was doing. And one of the remarkable things about Gamble was his capacity to travel and play over 250 shows a year, be on the road as he constantly was, and yet come home and gather everybody up in the car and take them to a restaurant and be the family person, and still have time for so many others, and have so much capacity to care about the environment, to care about Florida. He just was a man of tremendous capacity as well as tremendous compassion. But Lynn would say that she always knew where he was, and that's quite a trait.
Thank you, Bruce, for reminding me of that. Very sweet.
Karen and Frank again ask, what was the footage that was being worked on mentioned at the beginning of the program? I can actually answer that question. Mr. John Wyrick, who's actually the very next question in the queue, he actually was, I believe, an editor. John, if you're still here, feel free to jump in. But oh, there you are.
Okay, I was the audio engineer and put the microphone on him and recorded at Channel 24 studio for a TV show that did air. and the videotape of that may exist. That would be in somebody's archives somewhere. But because I was sitting there, I went and rolled my own tape just to have it, because at that time I read in a magazine that Gamble was one of the most talented unsigned artists that didn't have a major record contract. He didn't for several years thereafter. So I had an audio tape of him, but the tape hasn't been played for 40 years. So I'm going to now that I'm retired, I'm going to spend some time restoring that tape, see if it's still savable. Don't know. Well, so we'll see what that show was like. That's about all I can say. I'm going to get some help from some people, and we're going to put it in a studio and take care of it. See if we can get it produced.
And John, if you're interested, the Winter Park Public Library would be more than happy to give that recording a home eventually. And if there's anything I can help, you have my email. And speaking of John, he asks, is the '65 Mustang still in the family? Please tell me it is.
Do you want me to answer that? I have an answer. My sister Lolly is not, she wasn't able to tune in. So she would do a much better job answering this, but I think she would be okay that I shared this. Daddy felt like he wanted to change over from the Mustang to Mercedes, because the Mercedes was a very well constructed car and he spent so much time on the road and he wanted to be in a safe vehicle. So he offered the Mustang. He kind of asked several of, now I was too young to drive, but I think he offered it to Chuck, my brother, Lolly, my sister, and I think Stacy and Stephanie too, although Stacy was closer to age and to me. But we all turned him down, and we have rued the day that we did that for many years. We wished we had kept it in the family. He clocked quite a few miles in that thing. So that's the story of the Mustang.
I'm sorry, that breaks my heart. My dad had a similar, I think it was a '68 Mustang Fastback that he had. So it's been a very similar model car. He almost let me have it too, and I couldn't learn to drive a stick shift.
Yeah.
Gloria Holloway asks, at some point between 65 and 69, when I lived in Daytona Beach, I saw Gamble somewhere. I'm thinking it might have been at Marineland, and I'm not sure.
He often played the highlight fronton in Daytona.
Okay.
It's possible there, but he did play a lot in Daytona.
Okie dokie. And that looks like that's the end of the questions, but Susan from Casa Feliz did want me to let you guys know that we absolutely, Winter Park Public Library is still going to be partnering with Casa Feliz from pretty much here on out. So if so guys at Casa, if there's any way we can help you guys, even if it's not virtual, please, we're going to be partnering with Casa Feliz right on. And eventually, hopefully when COVID eventually blows over and the documentary comes out, we actually would be happy to screen that in our new raked auditorium at the new Winter Park Public Library building. Let's see. Gloria, where in Daytona, Bruce?
I know that he would sometimes perform at the Highlight Fronton. I don't even know if it's still there anymore, but the place where they would play Highlight, they would have concerts there as well. And I know he actually played there with Jimmy Buffett on at least one occasion.
Okay. And Rick Kilby asks, how can we get your book?
The book is available directly from the publisher, University Press of Florida. I believe they're having a 30% discount sale right now. You can contact them directly. I think it's upf.org, but University Press of Florida. It's also available on Amazon, and there are some bookstores, Barnes & Noble and so forth, that still carry the book. but the best, most assured bets are either directly from the publisher or from Amazon. Thank you.
And I'm actually recording this meeting, so eventually I will upload this onto YouTube, and this will actually, all of that information, where to get Gamble's CDs, where to get Bruce's book, and eventually where to get the documentary on DVD, all of that will actually be down in the video description. So keep an eye out for that. That's actually going to be hopefully how we do all of these virtual classes, is eventually they will have a permanent home on the library's YouTube channel. So be sure to watch out for that. And I think without further ado, does anyone else have any other questions?
I would just like to thank everyone for their patience and joining us tonight, and especially thank Parlor, the partnership between the Friends of Casa Feliz and the Winter Park Public Library. This was a first for all of us. Maybe you could give some feedback to the organizers so that we know how it went. The technology is way beyond my pay grade, but we did our best. But thank you so much for coming out, and I hope you learned something. I hope it was entertaining, but most of all, I hope you'll keep Gamble in your thoughts and continue to support his legacy and keeping his memory alive, because it's so important to the state of Florida.
I would also like to thank everyone for coming out. If we don't have any other questions, then we'll eventually go ahead and end the presentation right here. Thank you guys for coming out. Just like Rick said, we will actually be doing this again next month. So be sure to watch. I believe it's February 23rd. Let me actually double check that very quickly.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep, February 23rd, same time, same place. So you guys just keep a watch out for that in the calendar. I'll eventually have the link to that up as well. Thank you guys so much for coming out. We appreciate all of y'all. Thank you so very much. Y'all have been awesome.
Thanks very much. That was really good.
Thank you guys. Now I'll be hanging out for a few minutes, so y'all just leave at your leisure, okay?
See everybody.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Bruce, and hi, Edith. We love you both.
Thank you so much, Miss Lynn, for coming out tonight. That was so wonderful for you to come.
What a blessing. I've got both my kids here, and we're all just soaking this in. We can't wait for future programs. So
Hello.
yes, there's my daughter Megan and Blake.
Hey, Blake.
Hey.
Good
And
to see you.
we've got
Good to see you all.
Dad represented behind us here.
Thought that might have been him.
Was. And Bruce, I forgot I did that terrible thing to you by putting his guitar in your hands. I forgot that. I feel so bad.
Quite a moment. I hope the audio quality was okay. I can't tell from what I'm doing here, so
It was
good.
perfect on my end.
We're all part of the great human experiment, so that's good to know, because we tried to practice it a few times and it never came out exactly right. So, but thank you to Rachel and to Rick for helping put this together, and we learned a little bit about technology anyway. So I do wonder what Gamble would think about all this.
He would be so touched.
I just wanted to say is I think he would be shocked that we're having this kind of a thing with his music. Here we are, all of us, many miles away doing this. It would be just a shock. So it's pretty impressive.
I agree.
So I want to thank you too on behalf of CASA and all of you. Like I said, keep your eyes and ears peeled, because there'll be other programming at the new library. There will be some fantastic stuff, and I'm thinking there might be, never know, but there might be a Gamble Rogers Music Festival there. Never know.
We do have that plenty of park space, so.
Right.
You know, they already have one in St. Augustine, but maybe this can be the Gamble Rogers Musical Festival West or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Well,
Bruce. We enjoyed your book.
Thank you. Thank you.
The sound was great.
Good.
Lynn, look at Edith's long hair. It's COVID.
Oh,
She
It's
hasn't had a haircut
wonderful. You both look
since
wonderful.
last March.
I love it. I know we all have COVID haircuts, don't we?
She cuts my hair regularly, so.
You both look wonderful. We miss you dearly. And Susan, I love your sentiment. Let you just know that you have volunteers to help you execute that dream.
Yeah, no,
Wonderful.
I just think it would be really, and I'm guessing prior to this too, I've heard from people who didn't sign on today, who went to high school and with him, who are still around, people who are like, oh, I couldn't make it, but I want to know. And I thought, how fun would that be
Yeah.
to have sort of a reunion of all those folks? It'd be just great. But
Yeah.
he just, I mean, this was great. Bruce, you did a beautiful job. It's just so, I mean, both you and Lynn, it's just wonderful to have you both working on this because it does give us some incredible insight.
Thank you. Is that ML McEwen that's still on? Does she want to say hello? Maybe?
Is that ML? I don't know. Or is it you, Megan Lacey?
Okay, I just unmuted. I'm still on.
Okay. There's ML McEwen. What a sweetheart. ML's husband, he passed away a couple of years ago. Bruce was my introduction to Gamble Rogers, and ML and Bruce spent many a night with Gamble, maintained a friendship throughout their lives, and she's living up in Mississippi now. We miss her, but ML, it's good to talk to you.
Well,
Yeah.
you too. Hope to see you soon, Bruce.
Yeah, I was going to ask where you were
And-
living now. So it's okay. People moved away. Huh.
But
She
I still
makes-
got my place at the.
Say again, you have a place, do you come back to Winter Park then?
Occasionally, I've lived in Orlando many years, and I've got lots of friends there.
Great.
But
Good.
with COVID, I haven't been doing that.
Yeah, well, yeah, none of us have.
We miss you, ML.
I'll see you soon, I hope.
Okay.
We love you, ML.
Well, you too, Lynn, and you're in Winter Park, right?
Well, we're back in Georgia. You know, we
Oh.
have one foot in each state.
Okay. Well, I just had heard you were in Winter Park. Yeah.
We're sending you full hugs. We love you.
Well, you too. You too.
You
Thanks
know,
for joining us, ML. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for reminding me.
Okay, we're going to say goodnight. Thank you again so much for the hosts and Lynn, and it's so great to see the family. And please give our love to the rest of the family, and please, we send our best.
we will. And thank you so much for thinking of them. And they are actually, you know, they knew about this, and we'll be sending them the recording so they can enjoy it. So thank you for recording this.
yes, ma'am.
Rachel, thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Rick, thank you. Susan, thank you.
Good night. You're welcome.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Everybody stay safe and stay well.
Yes,
You
sir.
too.
Thank y'all so much for such a wonderful program this evening.